I can only say that I am with you 1,000%. And the reason you're my first stop is that, as you know, I have a running war with the media. They are among the most dishonest human beings on earth. I get up this morning, I turn on one of the networks, and they show an empty field. I said, wait a minute. I made a speech. I looked out. The field it looked like 1.5 million people. They showed a field where there were practically nobody standing there.
He spoke for about 15 minutes, so that's obviously just a little piece of that. What did you think of his remarks?
I was concerned about the remarks that he made at the CIA in front of that wall. That wall contains the stars of CIA officers who've given their life for this country. That's about as close as you can get to hallowed ground at the CIA. It's the equivalent of speaking at Arlington Cemetery. And I think that, initially his comments about supporting the CIA were appropriate and should have been said. But I think to go off and start talking about the press, talking about how many people were at the inauguration, I just think that, frankly, that was not appropriate. And I just think that the president needs to understand that he is president of the United States now. He's not just a candidate. He doesn't have to spend time embellishing himself or what he did. He's president of the United States. And when you go to the CIA, you have to go there with some degree of respect for where you're standing and the people that you're talking to.
John Brennan, like you, a former CIA director, through a spokesman, said former CIA director Brennan is deeply saddened and angered at Donald Trump's despicable display of self-aggrandizement in front of CIA's Memorial Wall of Agency heroes. Brennan says that Trump should be ashamed of himself. Would you go that far?
Well, I certainly would express some of the same concerns about what he did at that particular place at the CIA. Wolf, as a former chief of staff to presidents, I've seen them walk into that office, the Oval Office, and suddenly be aware of the awesome responsibility that you have as president of the United States. And, sometimes it's tough for any individual to get out of the campaign mode and suddenly realize that it's over. You're now the 45th president of the United States. And I just got the impression when he was speaking there that somehow he forgot that he was president of the United States and was speaking to the intelligence officers that spend their lives trying to serve this country. That was not the appropriate place to start whining about what was happening in terms of numbers at the inauguration and what have you. I hope that he has learned from that experience that when you go and visit these agencies and departments, do it with a great deal of respect for the people that serve this country.